Oh yeah. There we go. The geese. Beautiful Owen Sound.
Yeah, hey. Ooh, I got my pint. It's been a long day, and now I'm taking it easy. Oh, God, yeah. It has been a very long day. Yeah. And I worked a long shift, and I am tired, and I'm trying to adjust the aim on this camera just a little bit. There we go. Centered. 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 There we go. Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah. Oh, wow, yeah. So I've been challenged on the question of what constitutes human rights and what human rights should be, and on the quote, atheist version, or the atheist human rights. Yeah, well, that brings to my mind a small problem, which is there is no specific atheist version of human rights. Human rights are a set of principles that have been agreed upon by the victorious Allies following World War II. A bunch of rules that we came up with to prevent the sort of horrors, atrocities, and abominations that took place under the Nazi Crusaders in their glorious crusade for Christ to both A, remove the Christ killers from Europe, and B, to redeem Russia back to Jesus. Yeah, those were the goals of the Nazis in World War II. Yeah. But the person in question, whose name I shall not give, asked me about the atheist human rights, as though there were such a thing. There are no specific atheist human rights. There is just human rights. And I pointed this out to them. And their response was, aha! So atheists have no right to complain about human rights violations. Atheists need to just shut up about human rights. To which my response is, only if atheists are not considered human. Because human rights are for everybody, not just certain people. And one of the big problems with the Western capitalist democracies is that when they list what is and is not human, they have a very bad habit still of excluding certain people from the list. The not quite human, the semi-human, the subhuman, and the completely not human at all. Yeah. And those groups of humans are still deemed to be a very real thing under capitalist democracy. In 1946 and 47, when the concept of human rights was just being created at the War Crimes Tribunals of Nuremberg and at the fledgling meetings of the soon-to-become United Nations, the issue was how to enforce laws after the fact. Because there had been no human rights in 1944 or 43 or 42 or 41 or 40. The concept of human rights had never existed before. And so the perpetrators of some of the most heinous atrocities in history were being tried under laws that were created after the fact, which, technically speaking, was illegal. Technically. And yes, also it was victors' trials. It was putting the vanquished enemy on trial in order to humiliate them and to create a justification for killing them. Yeah. What was absolutely needed was for some Allied war criminals to also be put on the dock. A few Allied war criminals, Allied personnel who had committed similarly heinous atrocities. And there were alive at the time certain American Marine generals who had participated in the second and third genocides of Guatemala, the second, third, fourth, and fifth genocides of El Salvador, the great genocide of Nicaragua, and yes, genocides in Haiti and in Costa Rica and in the Philippines. American military leaders who had participated in these genocides, British officers who had participated in genocides in India, Africa, and the Middle East, French officers who had participated in some of the most brutal genocides of the 1930s. These men were still alive. And yes, putting them on trial alongside of the likes of Hermann Goering and Julius Streicher would have been a good thing. Because even though you are now enforcing laws that did not exist when these atrocities were committed, you're enforcing these laws equally upon everybody. You're not just picking and choosing, you're being fair. And this is where the Allies failed. They made Nuremberg into a victor's trial, which automatically delegitimized everything that they achieved there. And yeah, everybody understood that because they were only going after the war criminals on the losing side and not also going after their own war criminals, the legitimacy of their complaint was invalidated. Now, this is not to say that the atrocities committed by the Nazis were anything less than horrific. They were horrific. And the bastards who committed them absolutely deserve to hang. But there needed to be a bit more fair and balanced approach, and there wasn't. They made it a victor's trial, where the conquerors get to put on trial the conquered on basically trumped up charges just for the pleasure of having a justification for killing them legally. Now, genocide was not illegal until 1945. By enforcing that law upon genocides committed before the late summer of 1945, the victorious Allies were immediately saying, yes, and this needs to cover us as well. At that point, some of the Allied nations' worst war criminals, worst mass murderers, should have been dragged out of the ranks of the cheering Allies and say, yeah, by the way, it's your turn too. And made to defend themselves in the same court that the Nazis were made to defend themselves. Now, admittedly, both the American prosecution lawyer and the American defense lawyer were very, very professional about what they did. And they tried very, very hard to make sure that everything stayed legal, maintaining at least the appearance of legality. They went with facts rather than feelings. And this was good. They made sure there were actual testimony from witness instead of trial by media. They did everything by the book to make the trials as fair as possible, despite the fact that, yeah, it was a foregone conclusion. Some of the people on trial absolutely were monsters who deserved to hang, but others were simply innocent bystanders who just happened to have a high-ranking position within the party hierarchy. Or in the case of the Navy, men who had done their very best to minimize the impact of the racial policies of their country, and yet they were still put on trial as war criminals, not because they had participated in atrocities, but because they were on the losing side, and they had humiliated the militaries, the navies, the admirals of the Allies for several years. And so they had to be punished. Not for being horrible people, but simply for exposing the fragile egos of certain British and American admirals. Karl Donitz did not deserve to be put on trial. He didn't do anything wrong. Himmler should have been put on trial, but he killed himself before he got a chance. There is some speculation that he may have in fact been murdered by the British, but I prefer to go with he killed himself because he didn't want to go on trial. But yeah, Julius Streicher, he was a propagandist. He made up the noble purposes of the Third Reich. Made it all up. It was all bullshit. He was the propagandist. Second only to Joseph Goebbels. In rank, but far exceeding him in virulence. Yes, the Nazis who committed these atrocities should have been executed. But there were a number of Allied officers who also should have been executed and weren't. And that is what invalidates a lot of human rights. It's simply the fact that far too often the powerful get to do whatever they fucking well please. Human rights legislation introduced in 1946 and 47 that was agreed upon by everybody called for the end of racism as the means by which societies were divided. And yet, in America, Jim Crow remained the law of the land until well into the 1980s. Oh, it was officially abolished in 1964, and then abolished again in 1968, and then 72, and in 78. Yeah. But it remained in force until the late 80s, when Reagan finally stepped down and was replaced by Bush Sr., who was able to quietly get certain town bosses and state governors to sit down, shut the fuck up, and retire. Margaret Thatcher continued to enforce the Irish Pale upon the Irish, an unequal, unjust, unfair society in which the English dominated and in which the Irish were subjected to daily humiliations, which ultimately led to Irish resistance and retaliation, which led to further British crackdowns, which led to further Irish retaliation, which led to further British crackdowns. Yeah. Yeah, that was a thing. France continued to oppress and persecute the Algerians, both Arab and Berber. They also insisted on persecuting the Basques of the Pyrenees Mountains. Yeah, a policy which led to Basque nationalist resistance, which led to further French crackdowns on the Basques. Yeah. All the victorious allies, including the Soviets, were guilty of monstrous and heinous atrocities, both before and during the war. But it was only the Germans who were put on trial and executed for those atrocities, which is unfortunate. A number of Italians should also have been hanged, but were simply allowed to quietly retire. But that's another story. Every country, every empire, every nation on every side in that war had its own monsters who were every bit as horrendously evil as the men who carried out the Holocaust. And yet none of them were put on trial at Nuremberg, and Nuremberg should have been a place to put all of them on trial. Of course, the most heinous injustice was the trial of Rudolf Hess, the man who had nothing to do with the atrocities. He was just a party functionary and a worshiper of the Fuhrer, who went on an ill-advised and ill-chosen mission. Pardon me. Ill-thought-out mission to try to negotiate peace on behalf of his master. Yeah. He wasn't evil, just stupid. But yeah, most of the people they hanged deserved it. And there were a lot more who deserved it who weren't hung. A lot of Nazis made deals. I mean, look at the American space program, Operation Paperclip. Look at the Russian space program. I don't know what they called it, but they had their own Nazi scientists and Nazi generals who agreed to give information for use in future training missions. Yeah. Everybody had their criminals. And Nuremberg should have been the place where all of them were put on trial together. Yes, absolutely, try the Nazis for their crimes, but also try the British, the French, the Americans, everybody, all of them. Every great power that participated needed its worst criminals investigated, arrested, and put on trial. And that didn't happen. Which, of course, leads to the phenomenon of Nazi sympathizers today trying to invalidate the results of the war crimes trials at Nuremberg completely. Trying to say that these guys did nothing wrong. Yes, they did. They did everything wrong. Just because it wasn't illegal yet didn't mean that it wasn't immoral, unethical, malicious, and fucking evil. To say nothing of hopelessly inefficient. You're going to war, you're going to have casualties, and you have some of your most talented doctors picking turnips in Poland for a bowl of gruel a day, provided that they can pick 1.5 tons without gloves, without tools, just with their bare hands digging in the dirt. 1.5 tons a day. Yeah, talented doctors being wasted who could have been putting back together injured German soldiers so that those soldiers, if they couldn't be moved back to the front, could at least be put back into production for war, into producing war materials. But no, working these doctors to death picking turnips. The famous Nazi efficiency was never really efficiency. It was absolute stupidity. You take some of your most fearsome soldiers, you starve them to death because you deem them to be the wrong race, quote unquote. Not that they could have won, they couldn't. For which I am eternally grateful, because that would have sucked. But the fact remains, The atrocities that were committed weren't the only atrocities. The people who were put on trial at Nuremberg weren't the only monsters. If you're going to go after the evil ones, you have to go after all of them. The human rights decisions made at Nuremberg in 1945 and 46 and 47, the human rights decisions made in Switzerland in 46 and 47, the human rights decisions made in New York in 1946. With the creation of the United Nations. A Canadian invention, by the way. Yes. William Lyon Mackenzie King, Prime Minister of Canada, came up with the United Nations as a replacement for the failed League of Nations. Yeah. A good idea in principle. But like so many good ideas, including the Nuremberg trials, executed poorly. Yeah. We do need to enforce the human rights laws that we have created. And we created those laws. They were not given to us by any magical genie in the sky. We came up with them. And we came up with them based upon what we observed in the world. And based upon the simple notion that every human being should be entitled to certain basic rights. Regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs, regardless of where they were born, regardless of the language that they were raised speaking, regardless of their height, their weight, their mental and intellectual acuity. Yeah. Everybody should have these basic rights. Everybody should have these rights. Everybody. These should be foundational. And we came up with these rights. We didn't receive them from somewhere else. We didn't receive them from a god. We didn't receive them from a genie. We didn't receive them from a wizard. We created them. And we're still working on the details of what actually should be a human right. And we're still trying to figure out how to determine whether somebody is human or not. I'll give you a hint. We're human. We're all humans. We're all humans. We're all humans. And so, yes, as an atheist, I have a say in human rights because I am a human. And you, as a human, have a say in human rights because you are a human. And you, 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 and you all have a say because you are human. But the dog over there barking in the next yard does not have a say because he's not human, he's a dog. We'll work on canine rights eventually. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, human rights. A good idea. A very good idea. And one which, yeah, we need to do more than just talk about it. We need to enforce it. The United Nations was created by the Canadian government and the various fellow victorious Allied governments agreed to join into it, as well as the vanquished Axis governments agreeing to join into it, and many of the newly formed countries that were created after 1948 were also brought into it, sometimes reluctantly. But the United Nations has always had a colonialism problem and a racism problem and an empire's problem. Yeah. It seems that all the great powers of the UN, everybody with a veto, is an imperial power. And imperial powers don't like to let go of their enslaved subjects. And it doesn't matter if you're a Soviet minister lording it over a bunch of Uzbekistani, or if you're an American governor of the American territory of the Virgin Islands, or the American garrison commander of an American imperial province like the Philippines or Cuba or Nicaragua. Yeah. Or a British officer in Ireland. Your country has a veto, which means that if the people that you're kicking the shit out of stand before the UN and beg for mercy and beg for their lives, your government can say, no, get back on your knees. Get back on your knees. You don't get to lift your face up out of the dirt. Because we are the great powers. The wind just blew my empty beer can. Just tried to take it away. And the great powers all did this. And continue to do this to their subject peoples, denying them the human rights that they themselves insist on having. And when a right is only a right for certain people and not for others, it stops being a right and it becomes a privilege. Rights are intrinsic. Privileges are all conditional. What are human rights? Personal dignity, personal integrity, the right to practice one's own faith in one's own home without fear of persecution, the right to have a particular color of skin without fear of persecution, the right to be born into a particular ethnic group, any particular ethnic group, without fear of being persecuted for it. Those are human rights. The right to be allowed to tell the truth without fear is a human right. Also, when I say the right to have one's own religion, I do also mean the right to not have any religion. Because there are countries where being an atheist is illegal. There are countries where being an atheist is a capital crime. They execute people like me in some countries. They execute people like me in a Christian country like Ethiopia, and they execute people like me in an Islamic country like Iran. Because we're atheists. Yeah. The right to not believe in your gods, whatever your gods may be, is a human right. Just as much as the right for you to believe in your gods is a human right. The right to live your life as you choose, so long as that choosing does not impinge upon the dignity, health, or survival of one's fellow human beings, is a human right. If I'm not hurting anybody, yeah, I should be allowed to sit here in the sun and drink beer in my own fucking backyard. Yeah. Absolutely, I should be allowed to do that. And here in Canada, I am allowed to do that. Yeah. Yeah. There are countries where I'm not allowed to do that. Yeah. Human rights. What are human rights? That's a very hard question to answer. Because you need to actually examine every aspect of humanity. You have to take into consideration cultural differences, religious differences, ethnic differences, geographic differences, climatic differences. I know among the Inuit there is a practice during particularly harsh winters when food gets scarce. Old people will, whether completely voluntarily or under silent pressure, leave the house and go out to an ice floe and wait for the polar bears to come. There are Inuit cultures where this is still practiced. The grandmother or the great-grandmother gives up her life so that there will be more food for the rest of the people in the village, in the community. And this was also part of an ancient practice of human sacrifice among many cultures during times of famine. People would be taken aside and offered to the gods. Is this a human right? I don't know. I know that today we look upon this and say that it is abhorrent. But then again, we haven't really faced a significant famine here in Canada since the 1930s. Or if you're an Inuit, since the 1960s. Yeah. Funny how that works. Yeah. Yeah. I think human rights are the principles that we have that we need in order to treat each other decently internationally. I think this is a very good way to sum it up. If you have a better explanation, by all means, present it. By all means, help me to get a better understanding of what is human rights. Now, the rights that we should have simply by virtue of being human. Aside from the various cultural, ethnic, national rights that each culture has, each society has, each country has, each religion has, the rights entailed under that religion, culture, ethnicity, country, etc. There are the rights that we should all have simply because we are human. Those are human rights. And I have rambled and meandered quite a bit, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Ta-ta.
Hey, yeah, there's the geese, including the babies. Oh yeah, the cobra chickens. Yeah, the cobra chickens, the geese. Gotta love the geese.